Yes, I want to first off thank Sean, who it's because of his insistence that I'm here today, and also want to thank Shirley. Let's give both of them a hand. Shirley, thank you for the leadership in helping to get 40 Days for Life rolling and such a success here in the Roanoke area. As Sean mentioned, my family and I just got back about 4 weeks ago from Australia. We visited the 7 cities that have done 40 Days for Life campaigns. They're trying to grow that to 30 locations by next year. And so we traveled, did 35 events over 13 days. They worked us very hard. I've been to 40 Days for Life locations in England, Canada, all over the United States. But shame on me for taking this long to get to a location right in my home state of Virginia. So it is an honor to finally be here. I know Sean has been here, but it's truly a joy to be with you here in Roanoke. I just drove down. I live in Fredericksburg, Virginia now, and so I just drove down, and what a beautiful drive, and getting to see the mountains and the colors just really starting to pop. It was beautiful, but the whole way there, as I was watching the clouds, I was wondering, are we going to get lucky, or is this going to be a wet 40 Days for Life midpoint event? And clearly God is being gracious with us, especially if I talk for a really short period of time, then we're going to definitely luck out. But as I was looking at the dark clouds that were rolling over the mountains as I was coming across from Charlottesville and then coming down I-81, I was thinking about the very fact that we're gathered together here is because of a different dark cloud that has rolled over our nation. And that's the dark cloud of abortion. And you know that dark cloud through what Planned Parenthood has wrought here in your community of Roanoke. But literally, we have seen since the 1973 Roe v. Wade Supreme Court decision, we have seen 54 million innocent children who have died under this so-called banner of choice. Millions of women have been wounded. Families have been torn apart. We see men shoved to the sidelines, told, well, you don't have a say in this. You're just a man. It's not your body. It's not your choice. But every child I've ever met had both a mother and a what? A father. Half the children aborted by Planned Parenthood and the abortion industry are male. And at the forefront of this crisis is this organization of Planned Parenthood. And I noticed they have a banner up on the building. It's faded a little bit. Does it say "I can't stand Planned Parenthood"? I'm not quite sure. I can't read it. I can't read it really well. But literally, this organization we stand in front of, last year, according to their own annual report, aborted 329,445 children across the United States. So 1 out of every 4 abortions in America was committed by Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood is an organization that does this being paid by you and me. And as taxpayers last year, according to their own annual report again, Planned Parenthood took in an all-time record $487.4 million of taxpayer funding, a $100 million increase in taxpayer funding under the Obama administration, which really should come as no surprise to us. For any of us who watched the debate the other night, we heard the name mentioned 4 times by one of the 2 candidates, singing its praises, saying things that weren't even true about it. Planned Parenthood does mammograms. There is not a single Planned Parenthood in the United States of America that does mammograms. And so unfortunately, this abortion monstrosity we stand in front of is at the forefront of destroying innocent life, of undermining our future. And when we think about when we are gathered here in this public right-of-way in front of this Planned Parenthood, it takes on even more significance. Because this year of 2012, we are in the midst of the 40th year of legalized abortion in America. This coming January 22nd, when we mark and memorialize the 40th anniversary of the Roe v. Wade Supreme Court decision, that will be the conclusion of the 40th year. And so when on that day we memorialize the millions of lives lost, when we remember the hundreds of women who've been killed by so-called safe and legal abortions, on that day when we look back, we realize that we have been wandering in this wilderness of abortion for 40 years as a nation. And obviously, as somebody who's involved in a ministry called 40 Days for Life, I have a significant bias towards the number 40. But it's because when we read throughout biblical history, we realize it's a time frame that is very important to God. Obviously, the 40-day time frame, we see it over and over again in the Bible as a time frame that God used to test the faithfulness of His people, but also He used it to bring about transformation many times. But the 40-year period, as we mark this 40th year of abortion, I don't know about you, but I can't help but think of the story of the Israelites. And they were being punished. If you remember the story, they were being punished 1 year of wandering in the wilderness for each day of their lack of faithfulness when the spies came back to the promised land. And they were scared. They were worried about the giants. And so they had to spend these 40 years wandering in the wilderness before finally arriving at the promised land that God had provided for them. Now, they still had to fight going into the promised land. But they got to that promised land, the land flowing with milk and honey. They were ready to go into the promised land, and God gave them his final instructions before they entered into the promised land. And if you want to go research it, it's in Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 19. The very last thing that God told the Israelites as they were getting ready to go into the promised land was the verse that says, I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Now choose life so that you and your children may live.
That's right.
So after 40 years in the wilderness, the final instruction, the one that God said was important enough to be the send-off for these Israelites, was to choose life, because they had set before them life and death, blessings and curses. And that, I believe, is instructive to us as we are finishing this 40th year of wandering in the wilderness of abortion. God has given us clarity of understanding. We do have before us life and death, blessings and curses, right? We see it played out right here on this public right-of-way. Death, life, we see it played out in our communities. But God is telling us to choose life so that our children, and that the children of Roanoke, of Virginia, and literally of the United States of America may have life, and have it abundantly. And that's the decision that each of us have to make, not only on each day of a 40 Days for Life, but literally each day as we live out the call that God has given us to speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. Sean mentioned that this whole 40 Days effort began literally with an hour of prayer. And that's exactly how it began. It was 4 of us, myself, a young couple named Sean and Mary Lisa Carney. Sean's been here visiting you. He's our campaign director for 40 Days for Life. And a young woman named Emily. And we were living at the time in College Station, Texas, the home of Texas A&M University, but don't hold that against me anybody who's not an Aggie fan. We have some people here who've got children who are Aggies. There we go. I was just talking to somebody who was just a second ago. Who was it I was talking to that had? I'm sorry, I'm looking around where you were. There you go. Grandchild is an Aggie. Gig'em. All right. So we've got, that was where it began in this town. But the reason that we felt that we had to do something, that it began with an hour of prayer, is the same reason that you have to respond. Planned Parenthood had come to our community. 20 years earlier, they had opened a facility that did not do surgical abortions. They just did quote-unquote family planning. Now, they were referring for abortions elsewhere. They were selling abortions, but they weren't doing them in our town. And so for 20 years, nobody opposed Planned Parenthood. And because it was a college town, because they recognized the market potential, they said, well, we've got to open up an abortion facility. And so in 1998, they announced it. In 1999, Planned Parenthood opened up that abortion facility in our town. And the Christian community initially was in an uproar and said, this can't happen, we should do something about this. But after several years, it just started to blend into the community. Many of the church's pulpits were silent. Many of the people who had been active in pro-life efforts were getting really tired. They didn't know what else can we do. And so 4 of us got together one day out of frustration saying, we've tried everything we know how to do. This was in 2004. And we said, what else can we do? And we recognized the difference of life and death, blessings and curses. We knew we were called to choose life. And so what we decided to do is respond to those words of 2 Chronicles 7:14. If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, God tells us, then I will hear from heaven. I will forgive their sin. I will heal their land. How many of us agree our land needs some healing right now? Amen? Yeah. So that's why we had to humble ourselves and pray and seek God's face. And it was during that time of prayer that we really reflected on the importance of a 40-day time frame. And there were 3 things that we felt that we had to do. Number 1, the most important thing that any of us can do, pray and fast for an end to abortion. Why is that important? Well, because we know that we're not going to end abortion on our own, right? With man, this is impossible. We don't have the money. We don't have the political influence. We don't have the judges. We certainly don't have the media. We can't do it. But with God, we are told all things are possible. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And so we felt the first and most important thing was to turn to God in prayer and fasting. Now, for me, fasting was a bit of a stretch because I had never fasted in my life. I was raised in a Christian church that did not emphasize fasting. I married my wife, Margaret, and we're now 20 years into our marriage. It keeps getting better every day. Margaret was raised Catholic, and so every Lent she would teach me more about fasting, but I had never fasted. But in Scripture, we're told that some demons can only be driven out through prayer and fasting. And we felt maybe this is something that we need to do. So we decided to pray and fast. We decided to invite our community to pray and fast. The second thing that we felt led to do was to hold this peaceful vigil right in the public right-of-way outside of Planned Parenthood. Now, why do we do this? It's because this is where lives are at risk. This is where women in a time of need are being given a sales pitch for abortion. When you think about a fireman, when the fire alarm goes off, they don't just go to their church and sit there in the pew and say a prayer. They go to the place where lives are at risk to save those lives. And that's why we come here, because lives are at risk at a Planned Parenthood facility. By being here, 2 or more are gathered in our Lord's name, He promises us He's present in our midst. And where is He more urgently needed than in a place of such despair and hopelessness that is a Planned Parenthood facility? But also being here, you are collectively awakening the conscience of Roanoke. As people drive by here and they're wondering, what are those crazy people doing out there? Inevitably, it helps them to realize, oh, wait a minute, Planned Parenthood is here. The abortion influence is here. And it wakens some of those people up to say, I need to do something about this crisis. But the final reason we come here and stand in peaceful vigil in this public right-of-way is because sometimes through your presence, God can change a mind, can change a heart, and can save the life of a child and spare a mother and a father and a family a lifetime of regrets. So that's why we do these 3 things. The third thing, prayer and fasting, peaceful vigil, and the third thing is community outreach. Because the most powerful advertising in the whole world is not a Super Bowl ad. It's not a billboard along the interstate. It's not Facebook advertising. The most powerful advertising is word of mouth. It's you and me talking to people in our church, people in our neighborhood, people in our workplace, and inviting them to also be a part of the solution to this crisis, which has reared its ugly head in Roanoke. And so we pray and fast, we stand in peaceful vigil, we engage in community outreach for a 40-day period. Those were the things that God put on us as a calling back in 2004 through 1 hour of prayer. And at the end of the hour, we had to make a decision. Would we answer this call, or would we shove it into a file cabinet and pretend we hadn't heard it? That's what we wanted to do, because we were scared. We didn't think we could do it. We didn't want to do it. We weren't sure we could pull it off. But when we realized that life and death, blessings and curses, children would die that next week in our town, women would be wounded, we realized we had no choice but to choose life so that children and women could live. And so we engaged in that first 40 Days for Life. We had no idea that 1,000 people would get involved in that local effort, that we would see abortions drop by 28%, sparing over 100 children from abortion. We had no idea, but that's what God did. And then one by one, not because of us, but because the Holy Spirit, other communities on their own began to duplicate. 40 days of prayer and fasting, 40 days of peaceful vigil, 40 days of outreach, and it began to grow on its own. So by 2007, by the late summer, we realized, hey, God is clearly onto something here. We need to join Him in what He's doing. And we felt that the answer was to organize a nationally coordinated 40 Days for Life. And just to show how small we thought, our vision was that maybe a dozen or 15 cities would join together in this effort. That first campaign, 89 cities across 33 states joined together, and it has just kept growing since then. Right now we are in the midst of the largest ever 40 Days for Life campaign. Here in Roanoke, you are one of 316 cities participating across 49 states and multiple other countries. There is a campaign going on right now in Uganda. There are campaigns in Australia, in Spain, in England, in Canada. So even when you're out here at times wondering, am I the only one crazy enough to be doing this? People in 315 other cities are lifting you up in prayer while you are lifting them up in prayer. So God has moved abundantly. We've seen over 500,000 people participate in 40 Days for Life campaigns, and we have seen God spare the lives of more than 6,000 innocent children over these last 5 years. During this campaign, today we're on day 23. We're just over the hump, so now it's all downhill. We're heading to the finish line. We have already had, during this campaign, confirmed reports of 248 children whose lives have been spared through your prayers, through your efforts, and those of people in 315 other cities. So God is showing up in a big way. We have seen now 24 abortion facilities that have closed their doors forever and gone out of business following 40 Days for Life campaigns. We give God all the glory for that. And we just got word yesterday that another Planned Parenthood abortion facility, this one in Abilene, Texas, just yesterday announced they are about to shut their doors and go out of business for good while a 40 Days for Life is happening outside. That'll be number 25. I don't know about you, but I wouldn't be too upset if this was number 26. How about you? Amen. Another thing that we never expected, and this was one that just completely took us by surprise, is that we would see 69 abortion workers have complete conversions and leave the abortion industry. many of them coming into the arms of the people outside, praying for them, some of them giving their lives to the Lord because of the people praying for them and loving them out of the abortion industry. You've probably heard the story of Abby Johnson, who was the director of the Planned Parenthood facility outside of which that first 40 Days for Life happened. I'm sure Sean probably talked about that when he was here. I was just recently talking with one of the other ones that we've had leave abortion Planned Parenthood facility. Her name is Ramona Trevino. Ramona was the manager of a Planned Parenthood in the town of Sherman, Texas. And Sherman's about an hour north of Dallas-Fort Worth. And the guy who signed up to do the 40 Days for Life outside of Ramona's facility is a guy named Jerry. And when Jerry heard about 40 Days for Life, he thought, wow, this is great, I should do it. But he was getting up to the time of the campaign to sign up, and in his words, he chickened out at the last minute. So he sat one out, and the next campaign came up, and it was this last year in the spring, and he finally said, okay, I've got to do this. And he signed up to do the 40 days, hoping people would show up. And several churches got involved. They had a good number of people. It was a struggle at times to get people to come out. But during their campaign, one day Jerry showed up, and he saw somebody talking to his volunteers, and was surprised to realize it was the manager of that Planned Parenthood facility. So he went up to talk to her, and she introduced herself and said, my name's Ramona. She said, you know, I was driving to work today, I was flipping my radio, and I came across a Christian radio station, and they were interviewing this woman named Abby Johnson. She had a conversion, and it was a 40 Days for Life going on outside her facility. She said, is that what you guys are doing? Is that a 40 Days for Life thing? And they said, well, yeah, that's what we're doing. She said, well, tell me more about Abby. And Jerry said, well, I just happened to have a copy of her best-selling book in my car, Unplanned. So he ran and got the book, one of 10 copies he had in his car, and he gave it to Abby, and he said, here, read it. Gave it to Ramona, Abby's book. And that night, Ramona went home, and she read the book cover to cover, and she came back the next day, and she said, that book spoke to me. I have been having this real struggle with my conscience over the role I play here at Planned Parenthood, but I'm a sole provider for my family, and I just don't know how we can make it. I just don't know. And they said, well, let us know. We're here to help you. We'll pray for you. We'll help you any way we can. The end of that campaign came, and she still was struggling with it. But one day, she went back to church. And when she sat there that day, she was in a Catholic church. It happened to be the day of the beatification of John Paul II, Divine Mercy Sunday. And she said it was like God just spoke to her and said, you are either part of the solution or part of the problem. Which are you going to choose? And she that day had that moment where she realized, I have to choose life. She turned in her resignation. She quit the next day. And that facility that she used to lead immediately started taking a nosedive because she was the business manager. She ran the place, and it started going down, down, down. Its finances went into the red, and then Texas defunded Planned Parenthood of state tax funding, and as a result, that Planned Parenthood had its doors closed down for good. So I went there on the day that facility closed, and it was awesome to see the Planned Parenthood sign ripped off the building. And it was awesome to meet the people who had prayed for that. But the best part of that day was at the very end when Ramona got up to speak, and she thanked the people who loved her out of Planned Parenthood, and then she thanked God for closing down the facility that up until a few months earlier she used to manage. Now that's a story only God could write. And that's the opportunity we have, is to partner with God in doing His great work. Life and death, blessings and curses, we have an opportunity to choose life. So during the remainder of this 40 Days for Life, as I said, we're already past the hump. We only have 17 more days left. Now it gets much, much easier. And so my encouragement to you on this 40th year of abortion is that we collectively agree to pull out all the stops, do everything we can, because lives are at stake. The future of our very nation is at stake, and this fall could not be a more important time to be praying and fasting, to be standing in peaceful witness of the sanctity of human life, to be doing everything we can. So can we today commit that we will pray more fervently than we have been praying? Pray for the babies, pray for the mothers, pray for the workers inside these facilities, pray for those who are standing out here in peaceful vigil and all around the country and around the world. Pray for a transformation of hearts in our nation. Maybe for you it's to fast for this season, to give up something, whether it's one type of food or give up one meal a day or do a Daniel fast of meats and sweets, give those up. There was a family that told me that they gave up their television for 40 days. And they said, we put all that time into 40 Days for Life. And I thought that was beautiful. Now, if you just think about Roanoke, if every believer just did that one thing and for 40 days turned off the tube and put that time into this peaceful vigil and into other pro-life efforts, would you start to see some transformation across the city? You better believe it. So we pray, we fast, in whatever way God calls us. Another thing is this vigil out here. As you see, when you are here, this vigil awakens the reality to people of what is going on in this town. Some people drive Other people drive by and wave their hand telling you that you're number one. But regardless of the response, you are making a difference by being here. And my encouragement to you is throughout these last 17 days to say, what more can I do? Maybe it's to be out here 1 hour a day for these last 17 days. And you may say, that's a lot of hours. Yes, it's 17 hours. But how many of us work more than 17 hours in a week, or go to school more than 17 hours, or we are as parents, we're more involved in 17 hours, certainly in the lives of our children. All important things. But literally over these next 2.5 weeks, if you put that same level of commitment here on this sidewalk, God could use you to literally save a life and maybe even impact an eternal soul. Another thing, community outreach. You know people who will only be a part of this 40 Days for Life if you personally invite them to join you out here. And so if you were to invite 10 or 15 other people to be a part, some of them will, some of them won't. And let's say of those who do come, they only did half that and invited 5 or 7 other people. But if everybody said, we're going to spread the word through community outreach every way we can, by the end of this 40 Days for Life, your vigil would fill this entire public right-of-way going far down that way and far down that way, and Roanoke would know that the body of Christ is no longer asleep at the wheel. So prayer and fasting, peaceful vigil, community outreach. And one more thing that this fall is very, very important, and I see it represented in some of your pins and bumper stickers. We have to make sure that we vote pro-life. And it's not enough. I just voted yesterday through early voting because I'm going to be out of town during Election Day. And it was a thrilling opportunity to know that what we're doing literally could determine the fate of hundreds of thousands or millions of children. And we need to make sure to exercise that civic duty when not only life, but marriage and family and religious freedom are under assault like never before. We have to make sure that not only do we vote pro-life, but we invite our friends, the people at our church, the people in our children's school, their parents, everybody we can to go to the polls, either early voting absentee ballots or going on November 6th to vote pro-life. Now these are all things that we can all do. None of them are requiring that we have to give of ourselves beyond just a little bit of our time, a little bit of our talent. But they're things that we can do, and I believe things we must do if we are to choose life, so that we, our children, and our children's children, and the children of this community may live. Now, it will not be easy to do more than you've done before. I recognize that. Some of you have been doing this work for decades, and my hat is off to you, and I thank you for allowing so many others to follow in your wonderful footsteps. But for some of us that are newer to this game, we have to realize that as we do these things that are right, they will not be easy. But the important thing we need to remember, they will be worth it. I mentioned that we've seen over 6,000 children spared through 40 Days for Life. I'll just share one final story of just one of those, but one that was very personal to me. Of those 6,000 children, I have personally only met 3 babies who have been spared from the 40 Days for Life campaign. I've traveled over 400 cities, I've met lots of people who've told me stories, but I've only met 3 of the babies. The first one was 2.5 years in 40 Days for Life. The second one was 1.5 years later, and the third one was 3 weeks ago. I was at the kickoff of the 40 Days for Life in Germantown, Maryland. And if you don't know, Germantown, Maryland has become a new hub, an epicenter of late-term abortion. Because Leroy Carhart, a late-term abortionist from Omaha, Nebraska, when laws were passed restricting abortions only up until 20 weeks, he moved his late-term abortion practice up to Germantown and now aborts babies up until literally minutes before they are born into 9 months of pregnancy. So they're doing a 40 Days for Life. They were getting ready to start off. They did one this past spring. And so I was at their kickoff rally, and right before I got up to talk, a woman got up to share her testimony and to tell the people assembled why their presence was so important. She said, in February, I found out that I was pregnant. My dad had just gotten thrown in jail for a crime he committed. The little townhome we were in, we were about to lose. I was pregnant with my second child. I had a 2-year-old from a different father, and this father wanted nothing to do with me. She said, I was scared. I didn't know what else to do. And so I drove to the late-term abortion facility. She said, I pulled into the parking lot that day, and for whatever reason, they were a few minutes late opening the door to the abortion center. And she said, I looked out just across the parking lot, and there were some 40 Days for Life people praying. And I called out to them and said, hey, do you know when they're opening? And somebody said, well, do you need some help? And she said, well, yes, I do. And so they went over and began to have a conversation. And they said, well, right around the corner is a pregnancy center, and they'll be happy to help you. They've got an ultrasound machine. They'll give you free resources. In here, you'll have to pay for everything. And so she went. And as she described it, when she went into that pregnancy center, she was instantly surrounded by love, by the 40 Days for Life volunteers, by the volunteers at that pregnancy center. And she said, I came in and realized I never wanted to leave. She never went back to Leroy Carhart's abortion facility. And those Christians came alongside her throughout her pregnancy up until on July 16th, the day before my own birthday, she gave birth to a little baby boy named Jordan. And so that day, at the beginning of the 40 days, just a few short weeks ago, the baby was only 2 months old, but she introduced all of us to little baby Jordan, and there was not a dry eye at that kickoff rally. Afterwards, I went over to thank her for sharing her testimony, and she said, well, thank you for what 40 Days for Life has meant for me and for Jordan. She said, would you like to hold him? And I don't know about you, but that's one of those questions that only has one answer. And I said, I would love to hold him. And she laid Jordan in my arms at that moment. I'd love to tell you he was happy and smiling. No, he cried. He wanted his mommy back. But I handed Jordan back, and as I looked at him and as I looked at his mother, I realized he was that close to being a statistic, that close to being aborted. That mother was that close to being left with a lifetime of regrets. What if people hadn't been praying that hour of that day? What if there hadn't been a 40 Days for Life? What if there hadn't been people who had been doing pro-life work for years to lay the foundation? What if there weren't a local pregnancy center to help that mother? What if the Christian community was not willing to come alongside that mother and her baby throughout the pregnancy and even after Jordan was born? As I looked at him, as I held him, I realized he is alive today for one reason. It's because of the faithfulness of people just like each of you. And so my prayer, if you have not yet had an experience of holding in your arms a little boy or a little girl who is alive because of your faithfulness in this little strip of grass in front of this Planned Parenthood facility, then I pray one day you too will hold a little child in your arms like that. For me, that moment was worth everything I've ever done in the pro-life movement. And for you, when you experience that moment, I believe you will feel the same way. It is worth everything that we have to go through. So let's take the words of Galatians and let us not grow weary in doing good. For at the proper time we are promised we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. Press on in this work. Finish this 40 Days for Life strong. Make sure we go to the polls and vote pro-life. And let's make sure this 40th year of abortion is the final year that becomes the tipping point, the turning point, when America once again looks forward to becoming a promised land where every life is protected and every child is welcomed into life and protected by law. God bless you. Thank you for your faithfulness, and it is an honor to stand with you here today. Thank you.